You know what is this?
It's a steel bar. I can hear it. Yeah.
It's an inch thick
An inch thick.
and over 3/4 inches wide.
Impossible. Wait a minute. Impossible. He's doing it, ladies and gentlemen. He has that steel bar bent in half, and he is doing it in plain sight of thousands watching on television. Look at that close-up. Look at that power. And ladies and gentlemen, he not only said he'd do it, he has done it. Pampero Firpo, the wild bull of the Pampas.
Oh, yeah!
Before Randy Savage snapped into Slim Jims and bellowed his famous "Oh yeah," there was another wrestler who screamed that slogan. A wild man with a gravelly voice, a stare like a jungle predator, and a presence that could turn any wrestling arena into a theater of chaos. Born Juan Cachmanian in Argentina to Armenian parents, he was a product of multiple cultures, and he carried that eclecticism into the ring as the character Pampero Firpo. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was a phenomenon, an early prototype for the unhinged, larger-than-life personas that would come to define professional wrestling in the decades to follow. Part savage, part showman, Firpo wasn't just playing a character. He was living a persona that blurred the lines between performance and madness. Long before the mainstream explosion of wrestling in the 1980s, Firpo was setting the standard for what it meant to be unforgettable. Though he's often overshadowed by the flamboyant stars who came after him, Firpo was a true original, a chaotic force of nature who brought violence, mysticism, and unfiltered energy to the squared circle long before it was the norm. His career spans continents, decades, and eras, yet his name rarely comes up in conversations about wrestling's most influential figures. This is the story of Pampero Firpo, the original wrestling savage, a wild man ahead of his time, and one of wrestling's most fascinating forgotten characters. Juan Cachmanian was born in Argentina on April 6, 1930. The son of an Olympic boxing hopeful, who later became a local boxing promoter, Juan initially tried his hand at boxing. He later claimed that he had the lack of killer instinct to be a successful boxer, but the world of combat sports was never far from reach. While his fists may not have carried him to glory in the ring, his towering presence and undeniable charisma caught the attention of professional wrestling promoters. Juan started his in-ring career in the 1950s, during a time when wrestling was deeply regional and still clinging to the illusion of sport more than spectacle. But even in that landscape, Firpo stood out. With his massive black beard, tangled hair, and constant growl, he looked less like a trained athlete and more like a character ripped from a pulp novel. Part caveman, part jungle sorcerer, part death cult mystic. He used several gimmicks and names, including Irvan the Armenian, Ivan the Terrible, the Missing Link, the Great Pampero, the Wild Bull of the Pampas, and then eventually his most known alter ego of Pampero Firpo. In Ecuador, during the early days of his wrestling journey through Latin America, Juan encountered the kinds of experiences that would shape his eventual transformation into Pampero Firpo. While traveling and wrestling in the region, he was gifted a legitimate shrunken head by a tribal leader, a token of respect for his toughness and charisma in the ring. Rather than treat it as a mere souvenir, Firpo recognized its symbolic power. The head, which he named Chimu, would become a central prop in his act, carried to the ring like a sacred talisman. It gave his character a supernatural edge, part warlock, part barbarian, and solidified the mythos that surrounded him. With Chimu in hand and wild energy in his eyes, he wasn't just a wrestler anymore. He was an omen of chaos, and fans around the world would come to fear him for it. Pampero Firpo eventually was brought into the United States in 1957. Although Firpo stood just 5 feet 8 inches, dwarfed by most wrestlers of the day, His sheer ferocity and unrelenting intensity in the ring made countless battles against larger opponents feel not only believable, but inevitable. Firpo didn't rely on size, he radiated danger. Every growl, every wild-eyed charge made it clear that he wasn't just competing, he was surviving, dominating, and unleashing something primal that size alone couldn't stop. For the better part of the next 2 decades, Pampero Firpo toured the wrestling globe, headlining cards and capturing championships in nearly every territory he entered. Along the way, he refined and blended his gimmicks, adapting to the demands of each region while never losing the wildman essence that defined him. Long before it became the signature phrase of Macho Man Randy Savage, the gravel-throated battle cry, "Oh yeah," belonged to Pampero Firpo. He growled it in interviews, shouted it in matches, and used it to punctuate his wild persona. A mix of primal rage and showmanship that audiences couldn't ignore. It wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a warning. For Firpo, "Oh yeah," was the sound of chaos coming. An early pioneer of what would later be called hardcore wrestling, Pampero Firpo was best known for his brutal, brawling style. Though he spent much of his career as a heel, his wild charisma and undeniable presence occasionally turned him into a fan favorite, most notably after a dramatic babyface turn following a fireball attack from the Sheik. He engaged in some of the bloodiest and most violent feuds of the territorial era, going to war with legends like the Sheik, Bobo Brazil, Johnny Valentine, Wild Bull Curry, the Crusher, and the Mighty Igor. His matches were not technical clinics, they were battles. Firpo often finished opponents with a crushing bear hug or his infamous claw hold, dubbed El Garfio, a supposedly paralyzing death grip that would leave opponents writhing in pain or lying unconscious. In an era when violence was implied more than shown, Firpo didn't just imply it, he delivered it. So why is Pampero Firpo so often forgotten? Part of it is timing. He peaked before cable television could immortalize his work. There are few surviving promos or matches, and many younger fans only know the names of those who were preserved on VHS in the 1980s boom. Firpo retired in 1981, just before Hulkamania took off and wrestling became pop culture. Even Randy Savage, who modeled aspects of his voice and cadence on Firpo, rarely got the chance to publicly credit his influence. Wrestling's memory can be short, especially when it comes to the unsung innovators. After wrestling, Firpo lived a quiet life, working at the post office in San Jose. He never boasted about his past, never demanded recognition, never chased a nostalgic spotlight. He was content. In recognition of his trailblazing career and enduring influence on the industry, Pampero Firpo was inducted into the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2018. Though long retired by that point, the honor served as a fitting tribute to a man whose wild charisma, brutal ring style, and unforgettable persona helped shape professional wrestling as we know it. When he passed away in 2020 at the age of 89, tributes poured in from old-school fans and wrestlers who remembered the mayhem he created. Pampero Firpo may not be the first name that comes to mind when fans look back on wrestling's golden eras, but his fingerprints are all over the sport's evolution. He was a bridge between the bare-knuckle brawlers of the past and the theatrical icons of the future, a man who lived his gimmick long before that was the norm. With a wild stare, a real shrunken head, and a roar that echoed through arenas, Firpo embodied the madness, mystery, and danger that made wrestling larger than life. His influence can be seen in everyone from Bruiser Brody to Mick Foley to Randy Savage, and yet his name too often goes unspoken. Pampero Firpo may not be a household name, but he should be. He was the original Savage, the first to roar, the blueprint for madness in the ring. Wrestling doesn't need to forget its wildest ancestors. It needs to remember who lit the fire in the first place.